Okay, all right. Good evening, everybody. It's just a little bit after 7 o'clock on Tuesday, October 11th, and just want to get started by saying thank you for joining us and welcome to another evening of the UC Santa Barbara Natural Reserve System Fall Virtual Seminar Series. We have a really exciting talk tonight, and I know you're all as excited as I am to get us going. Before we really dig in and we get our speakers introduced and everything, I wanted to just start first with a few introductions and housekeeping. And I see we already have a Q&A question that's popped up about last week's seminar too. So I'll be sure to get to that. But first, my name is Marianne Whitman. I'm the Executive Director of the UC Santa Barbara Natural Reserve System. And again, I'm just so pleased to be with you all tonight in this virtual way. For tonight's program, the way that it'll go is that first we'll have Dr. Andrew Brooks, who is our Reserve Director from the Carpinteria Salt Marsh Reserve, give a little bit of information about the reserve, and then he'll introduce our speaker. And tonight we're so lucky to have Whitney Abbott to join us tonight. Tonight's presentation is available with closed captioning. So if you see that on your Zoom window and you would like to have those captions, please toggle that on. At the end of our presentations tonight, we'll have about 10 or 15 minutes or so for a Q&A session. And that Q&A session is where you all, the audience, gets to interact with both of our speakers tonight, our Reserve Director, Andrew Brooks, and also our featured speaker, Whitney Abbott. So the way that you do that, and I'm sure you're all professionals at Zoom now, but look at the bottom of your screen and there's a little button that says Q&A, and you can click on that, and then you can type in your answers, and we will try to get to responding to as many of your questions tonight as we can. We usually run out of time, so if you want to follow up with our speakers after tonight, then you absolutely should, and their contact information will be available. Tonight's presentation will also be recorded and posted to the UCSB Natural Reserve System YouTube page, probably tomorrow morning. So share with your friends or get together with them and share this great evening at another time if you'd like. And with that, I just wanted to say a few things about the UC Natural Reserve System and why we're all here today. So I think the UC Natural Reserve System is really one of the greatest things that the University of California has to offer. And what it is a set of 41 sites across the state of California that are preserved and protected explicitly for research, for university level education, and for public service purposes. And all of this is so that we can understand and steward our lands better. So the UC Santa Barbara campus oversees and manages 7 of these 41 sites. And tonight we're going to zoom into the Carpinteria Salt Marsh Reserve with our featured talks. One quick thing before I kick it over to Andy is we had a question in the Q&A from Kim and Wayne Lintz asking about last week's Otter seminar. So our apologies, we unfortunately had to cancel last week's seminar. I'm super bummed out about that too. Who doesn't love to hear about otters from San Luis Obispo County? So they're still all up there in the ocean waiting for us, and we'll try to potentially reschedule at the end of this season. And if we can't do that, then we're certainly going to invite Gina Bental to come back and join us next year to tell us all about sea otter savvy and what those sea otters are doing out there in the ocean. So with no further comments from me, let's get started. And Andy, would you like to take us away?
Sure, thanks, Marianne. Let me see if I can get my screen shared properly here. I think that should be correct. So I want to welcome everybody to tonight's seminar. As Marianne said, tonight's speaker is Whitney Abbott. And I'm really happy that Whitney could join us tonight and talk a little bit about her work in the marsh, because it's, I almost wanted to say it's unique, but it's really not. Tonight's seminar is really going to focus on the use of the natural reserve system, and in my case, the Carpinteria Salt Marsh, by artists and by the art community. And so that's where we're going to begin. Just to reiterate what Marian said about the University of California's natural reserve system, we think of it as a library of ecosystems. And the idea is that these reserves are scattered throughout the state of California, and hopefully represent most of the unique ecosystem types throughout the state. As Marianne said, it is the largest university managed system of ecological reserves in the world. And we really think it's one of the crown jewels of the University of California. If you look up there at the mission statement that I've pasted in, Marianne read these out, but I want to focus on the three sort of different aims of the UC NRS mission, and that's university level teaching, research, and public service. And I'm going to return to this mission statement in a little bit, but just sort of keep that in mind, that these are really the three principal aims of the NRS mission: teaching, research, and public service. So a little bit of history about the Carpinteria Salt Marsh. To begin, of course, we'd like to acknowledge and honor the indigenous communities in the region and recognize that the Carpinteria Salt Marsh Reserve is located on the homeland of the coastal band of the Chumash people. And we thank them for their contributions. The Carpinteria Salt Marsh Reserve was added to the UC Reserve System in 1977 as the 23rd reserve. For those of you who aren't local, the reserve is located just west of the city of Carpinteria. It's about 12 miles, 20 minutes south of Santa Barbara, and about 84 miles north of the city of Los Angeles. The reserve itself consists of 120 acres of the larger 230-acre Carpinteria Salt Marsh. The portion of the salt marsh that makes up the reserve, I've shown there in that photo on the right, that's sort of shaded in green. So as you can see, the university's reserve is about the middle third of the salt marsh, really the middle half of the salt marsh. The rest of the marsh is actually owned by several other different groups, including the city of Carpinteria, the Land Trust for Santa Barbara County, the County of Santa Barbara, and a number of private homeowners and their homeowners associations. The marsh is, in technical terms, it's an estuarine tidally influenced coastal salt marsh, or as we like to say in much simpler terms, it's a coastal wetland. Now, why was a coastal wetland added to the UCNRS? Well, as I said, the UCNRS is trying to protect as many of the unique ecosystem types present throughout the state, and wetlands, particularly coastal wetlands, are disappearing across the United States, but also in California at a pretty alarming rate. California actually leads the nation in wetland loss. Throughout the United States, we think we've probably lost more than 50% of the wetlands over the last 250 years, but within California, it's much higher. It's about 95%. So Carpinteria Salt Marsh Reserve was added to the UC NRS system in 1977, really to protect one of the last sort of remaining high-functioning coastal salt marshes in Southern California. Now, for those of you who aren't up on your coastal wetland ecology, these are some of the reasons why wetlands are important. First and foremost, they're important for storing surface water and as flood control. We've all seen the news reports coming out of Florida following the latest hurricane, and in a lot of cases, some of that damage actually occurred because some of the coastal wetlands and coastal ecosystems have been removed and developed. And without these systems to buffer big disturbances like hurricanes, we see more and greater damage. So the Carpinteria Salt Marsh serves a very important function in terms of flood control for the Carpinteria Valley in the city of Carpinteria. Wetlands provide erosion control. Waves tend to break within the wetland as opposed to right on the shore itself. They maintain water quality. They remove a lot of nutrients that come down from the local watersheds before they actually enter the ocean. They support a very high level of biodiversity, something that's becoming more and more important. They act as carbon sinks. Wetland soils are able to sequester a great deal of carbon. And so a lot of the excess carbon that goes into the atmosphere, some of our researchers are finding is actually winding up in salt marsh soils. And something that is really going to sort of form the topic of tonight's talk, there's just a natural aesthetic to wetlands that's worth preserving for no other reason that they're just wonderful places to be. Now, the Carpinteria Salt Marsh itself is sort of a natural ecosystem in an urban landscape. It's a tiny bit of what was a much larger wetland system, the historic El Estero. You look at that sort of hand-drawn map there on the right, that red outline is the existing salt marsh. And you can see there are bits and pieces of it that sort of stick out to the side, particularly on the right-hand side. That's wetland that's been lost. To date, it no longer exists as functioning salt marsh. And the historic Carpinteria Salt Marsh, for those of you who know the area well, would have extended almost all the way to Carpinteria Creek, so quite a bit further to the east and actually throughout a lot of downtown Carpinteria. That little tiny picture down there in the lower left shows the different types of land use that occur in the watershed. In other words, the area that are drained by the creeks that feed into the Carpinteria Salt Marsh. As you can see, most of it's yellow. Yellow represents open field farming, or it's orange. Orange is urban areas, houses, roads, other types of buildings. And then there's a little bit of green in there as well, which represents some greenhouses and some orchards. So a lot of agriculture in the Carpinteria Valley. It's one of the things that drives the Carpinteria Valley economy. And so it definitely has an influence on the salt marsh. Now, you can't talk about the salt marsh without talking about one of the things that makes it such a wonderful place to work in terms of what I do as a marine ecologist, as a researcher, and that's the incredible biodiversity of the marsh flora and fauna. We have over 250 species of plants. Some of these are actually listed as rare or endangered, including salt marsh birdsbeak, Ventura marsh milkvetch, actually a plant that was thought to be extinct until it was rediscovered in Ventura a little over a decade ago. And now we have a population in the salt marsh to try to buffer the chance that it will go extinct again. Coulter's Goldfield are there. You can see those. We have, at last count, I checked the Cornell eBird website just yesterday to get the most recent updated number. And as of yesterday, 234 species of birds have been reported from the Carpinteria Salt Marsh. And some of these are birds that you tend to see quite a bit, particularly if you are out along the coast, things like great blue herons. But we also have a pair of osprey, and we have population of Belding savanna sparrows, which is another listed species. And then we have many, many species of marine fishes, marine invertebrates. We have native California Pacific oysters. We have fiddler crabs. The salt marsh is actually the northern limit for fiddler crabs. You won't find them any further north than the Carpinteria Salt Marsh. And any of you that have been down in the Carpinteria Salt Marsh Nature Park along the eastern edge of the marsh may have seen the sometimes large groups of leopard sharks that come into the marsh to breed. So this incredible amount of diversity makes the marsh just a wonderful place for scientific research and university classes. Now, the talks that were given in the marsh the last 2 years during this seminar series really did focus on research. Dr. Kevin Lafferty of the USGS and UCSB gave an amazing talk on parasites and parasites' role within marsh ecosystems. In his talk, the parasites run the natural reserve system. Kevin's answer to that question was a resounding yes. And then last year we had Dr. Adam Green, who at the time was the chair of the Environmental Studies Department at Santa Barbara City College. And Adam really focused his talk on the use of the reserves in university level education, with his talk getting them into the field, teaching them the use of natural reserves. As Marianne mentioned, all of these talks are available for streaming on the UCSB NRS YouTube channel. If you just go onto YouTube and search UCSB NRS, you should get both the complete 2020 and 2021 seminar series, and then you can go through and watch all of those presentations. As I said, I want to get back to that mission statement again. And I've highlighted in red there public service. And so public service is definitely something that the NRS engages in. It's part of our mission. And it includes things like our various K through 12 programs, public outreach events like Santa Barbara Creek Week. We also offer public tours at some of the reserves. Some of our reserves have a public seminar series that's specific just to the research that's going on at that reserve. But one of the things that sort of surprises a lot of people when I mention this to them is that all of the UC reserves are heavily utilized by people from the arts communities. And the Carpinteria Salt Marsh is no exception. We have folks that have come down and recorded marsh sounds for incorporation into musical compositions. We've had 8th grade, 5th grade students show up and participate in a poetry slam where the students spent time in the marsh and then wrote poems that describe their experiences. We have a really avid group of photographers that come down. It's a wonderful place to get bird photos, but also really interesting landscape photos. And of course, we have a really vibrant community of artists who use the reserve for painting. And that top photo there shows some of the artists from the Southern California Artists Painting for the Environment, or SCAPE. SCAPE this year had what they call a paint out. It's an organized event. This year's paint out was a celebration of art and nature, and specifically used the UCSB Natural Reserve System for their artists as subjects. And their works are going to be presented at the Montecito Music Academy of the West on December 3rd and 4th. So if anybody's interested in seeing some of the artwork that was produced by the SCAPE members, please check out that show at the Montecito Music Academy. And lastly, for many, many years, for at least as long as I've been the reserve director, we've had painters from the Oak Group use the reserve. They sometimes come singly, they sometimes come as a group, they often come for multiple weeks in order to capture the marsh. And we're very fortunate to have with us tonight one of the members of the Oak Group, Whitney Brooks Abbott. Whitney is a local artist and an art educator. She's a member, as I said, of the Oak Group. She's actually a longtime Carpinteria resident. Whitney's a graduate of the Kate School. She actually did her undergraduate degree at UC Santa Cruz. She was born in San Francisco, but I think she moved very, very early on to Carpinteria and spent a lot of time sort of painting early scenes of her family's property in the city of Carpinteria. So I don't want to take up any more of Whitney's time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to her, and I'm going to stop sharing, and Whitney, take it away.
Thank you so much, Andy. It's an honor to be here. It really is. Andy has been the keeper of the key to the marsh for the Oak Group for many, many years. He's the one we call when we offer, or when we have our paint outs, and it's an honor to be able to give back to the community in this way by bringing this presentation. So without further ado, I will get this started. All right. The Carpinteria Salt Marsh from an artist's perspective. This is a photo of me taken by Bill Dewey a number of years ago, actually. But I wanted to use it just to illustrate what it is we do. We take our easels outside. We record the light and the season and what we see when we're on location. And although I would be called a plein air painter, I'm hesitant to say that we do all our work outside. Sometimes we take it inside the studio, and sometimes what I paint is a little more abstract, a little bit more from my imagination, but there's nothing like being on location and really studying the light on a surface, really being there in a place when the seasons change, when the temperature changes, and when you can study that shifting color and light. So this is actually a more recent picture of myself on the left and my mom, Meredith Abbott, on the right, working in the Carpinteria Salt Marsh, actually just a few weeks ago. We were working on a project And this is a picture I took of my mom. I don't think she was expecting me to take this picture, but I wanted to record the marsh in the background, and I want you to take a good look at her the palette and how she has her paints laid out on her palette. She's got her coffee, of course. She paints in oil, and there's a specific arrangement of her colors on her palette that that is important for this next slide, which I want to show you. This is one of my all-time favorite paintings of the marsh, painted by my mom in 1990. She went out, captured the full moon over Rincon Mountain, that iconic shape in the background, reflecting on a marsh tributary with the light of the city of Carpinteria on the right-hand side. And what I love about this painting is the fresh approach that she took when she painted it. You can see the drawing, you can see the scumbling, as she calls it. You can tell that she was focused on recording the moment as quickly as she could. And also, just because she knew where the colors were on her palette, she was able to nail those values. And there's a saying that if your values are accurate in a painting, then your drawing will be accurate too, and it will read the way you intend it to. So Mom brought this painting home in 1990, and I loved it, and I asked her if I could have it. So she signed it Mommy down in the lower right-hand corner, and I actually took it with me to UC Santa Cruz. When I came back to Carpinteria, I hung it in my house where it hangs today. And the other important thing about this painting is the date. In 1990, a lot of people in our community were really realizing how important open space was for our families, for our future, really, of our small town in Carpinteria, in Santa Barbara, and all over California. I feel like people were realizing that our open space was becoming endangered, threatened by either development or the encroachment of suburbia. There were a lot of local movements to try to limit that development. And in the artist community, we artists decided that we could actually do something about this. Ray Strong in the middle there in plaid. Let me see if I can pull up the laser here. So you can see Ray Strong in the middle and Arturo Teo next to him. Two friends decided that they could start a group of artists to specifically paint those endangered landscapes, raise awareness within the community about landscapes that were disappearing quickly, and most importantly, show their artwork at exhibits that would raise money for organizations that were based on conservation. So these two folks got together with Larry Iwerks, Skip Smith, John Iwerks over here, and Erica Edwards, and I think Michael Drury, who's not in this picture, but the seven of them started this initial group, which grew very quickly. By the time I joined over here, there were about 25 members. This was one of the very first invitations to the show at the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History. It was to benefit the museum because they had just suffered a fire out on Stearns Wharf at the Sea Center. Here's the listing of the artists. And I love this illustration by John Iwerks. It depicts the bulldozer coming and scaring away the artists who had set up their easels to paint the beauty of the land. In my studio, I found some wonderful little mementos. This must be from what was then the Wilcox property. and is now the Douglas Family Preserve. And a call to artists behind that, printed on a dot matrix printer. But it's wonderful to see these early efforts. Up there you can see Wilcox Property, Moore Mesa, Elwood, Haskell's Beach, Carpinteria Bluffs. All these places were either threatened by development or in some cases gone. Another invitation about 10 years later, this actually was celebrating the success of the preservation of the Wilcox property. And that leads me to the Carpinteria Salt Marsh. This is a little piece of that map that Andy showed you earlier, just describing the extent of the marsh as it existed in 1869. And what I wanted to point out is that this is all farmland all around, just a little bit here and a little bit there, no houses. By 1967, you can see houses along the dunes. You can see housing tracks over here. You can see the railroad and the freeway up on top. This is the access road that is actually the UCSB access road now coming out of El Estero. And thank you for allowing me to pilfer this wonderful map. In 1981, this is what it looks like. More housing over here. Park over here. Here's the UCSB access road. So you can really see that when you're on this road, you are surrounded by the beauty of open space. You can be in the middle of a small town suburb and really, as far as you can see, you will be in nature. So as Andy had mentioned, there was a big effort, a community effort, which involved multiple organizations, the city of Carpinteria, UCSB, the Land Trust for Santa Barbara County, all worked together for about 10 years for a restoration plan. This is on the Carpinteria property side, but just to illustrate what it looked like, a year later, it started returning to nature. And the Oak Group was so elated, we jumped on the bandwagon and had a show to celebrate Carpinteria's open space. So on the left, you have a beautiful illustration by Glenna Hartman of the Carpinteria Salt Marsh. Over to the right is a painting by Arturo Teo. Down below is Meredith Abbott, and then on the far right is Erica Edwards' portrayal. So we're really celebrating our open spaces that we have saved as a community. This was a photo taken that same year in 2005, and Ray Strong in the middle at this time is 100 years old. We had just won an award for Santa Barbara Beautiful, and we're all gussied up at the Libero Theater. So I'm going to take a moment and show you some of my paintings of the Carpinteria Salt Marsh, starting from around that same time, 2005. This painting is a small painting, but I really was drawn to it from the beginning. It was in a show that the Oak Group was invited to partake in down in Los Angeles. And the theme of the show was the intersection of suburbia and nature. And even though this is a small painting, I feel like it sort of says it all. You have some elements of suburbia behind the marsh. You have a palm tree, which is, of course, non-native. So there's elements of humanity, but then you also have this perfectly peaceful outgoing tide in the foreground. Another early painting of mine of the Carpinteria Marsh. And one of the amazing things about the Carpinteria Marsh is the fact that it is ever changing depending upon the season. And this is a perfect illustration of late summer color. That pickleweed changes with the weather. And the next few photos are storms that I was able to capture. This painting is called Errant Cloud. And it struck me that the pattern of the cloud was very similar to the pattern of the outgoing tide. This is called Storm Steady. Again, from about 2005. And another storm study from the outlet of the creek. This one became a much larger painting, about 5 feet by 6 feet. This is a lovely illustration of the great white herons, which have become practically camouflaged against the water. This is a terrible slide, but I just wanted to give you an example of how they would be presented officially in a show. And I had to include these 3 studies. These 3 paintings were all painted at the end of the UCSB access road off of El Estero, pretty much from the same place. And what is wonderful about this access point is that you can never get tired of painting the same thing. So I found that the painting on the left, which was done in probably midsummer, has those summer hues, which are sort of softer, and the light on Rincon is very soft and muted. Whereas the painting on the right, which was painted in the wintertime, has much crisper colors. The light on Rincon Mountain is sharper. There's less atmosphere. And the painting in the middle is just cold. It was a wintertime painting, and it was just very brisk. These paintings, to me, are sort of representational of Van Gogh's haystacks that he painted over and over again in different weather and different conditions. They have that element of intrigue that he found. This is a painting of sunrise, actually, looking towards Santa Barbara, and those are car lights reflecting on the 101. So I discovered in going through my slides that I had a lot of paintings dated from 2007. And I was asking myself, why do I have so many sunrise and sunset paintings? Again, the iconic Rincon Mountain. And the reason is because our first child was born in 2007. And so I would take those early morning opportunities when everybody was asleep to come down to the marsh and paint for a couple hours in the morning or a couple hours in the evening, just to keep the paint wet. And I learned so much from that experience. This is pre-digital images, and I apologize, it's a little blurry, but I wanted to use it anyway, just to show you how much you can see from the Carpinteria Marsh. These are the first shadows, sunrise shadows with contrails kind of following that pattern of light from that same spot. And again, palm trees, little essence of suburbia. A study of the foothills. You can see Carpinteria Valley sort of creeping up the foothills from the edge of the marsh. You can see the change in vegetation as it turns to chaparral. This I had to include because you can see the very dramatic shift in color of that pickleweed. Painting on the left, late fall, crisp light, and the painting on the right is the same pickleweed, but painted probably, I'm guessing, a little June gloom in there. Willow trees. And this painting, ironically, is titled Santa Barbara from the Carpinteria Salt Marsh. It is ironic, you can actually see the mesa. So this was painted, I'm guessing, probably around 2012. Small town from the Carpinteria Salt Marsh. With your telephoto lens, artists tease each other sometimes because we often ask each other, how did you possibly see that from where you were standing? And Well, some of it you just have to put on your binoculars and pretend. And also from the Carpinteria Salt Marsh, you can see the incoming tide. This is called Tide Flux. Also probably painted around 2013, I'm guessing. The painting on the left, you can look north and see Santa Barbara. The painting on the right, you can see the Channel Islands in the distance. And this was painted, of course, in 2018. It is called Fire, Water, Light. And this is the first day when the Thomas Fire was approaching and the light from the fire was starting to reflect on water in Carpinteria. That same year, I had a commission to paint the outlet. You can see on the left, the Pacific, and you can see on the right, the more tranquil water. And I have a feeling this was a high tide. This was really fun to paint. And that takes us back to our present day. This is circling back. This is the Oak Group today. Here we are. We have gained a few members, lost a few members. I want to take this opportunity now to share some of the Oak Group's work and share a little bit about them. Here's some Oak Group facts. Today in 2022, we are 25 artists. To date, we have supported over 20 local nonprofit organizations. And my gosh, that would include other than UCSB, we have the Land Trust for Santa Barbara, we have the Museum of Natural History, the Nature Conservancy, Environmental Defense Center, Marin Agricultural Land Trust, Gaviota Coastal Conservancy, Citizens for the Carpinteria Bluffs, and most recently, of course, San Marcos Foothills Coalition. We have raised almost $3 million in sales to date. 45 to 50% of that would go to those organizations to help conservation efforts. And I really wanted to include all the members of the Oak Group. I don't think I have time to read it, but I want to take a moment and pay homage to all the members present, past, and those who have decided to step down. Quite a long list. It's really fun to look at this. So now I want to share with you the Oak Group's images of the Carpinteria Salt Marsh. And this is an older painting by Arturo Teo. And maybe you can tell by the vehicle, but this was one of our very first paint outs with a pastel artist to the right, and Glenna Hartman, pastel artist. Arturo painted this in oil. This is a watercolor by Chris Chapman. A pastel by Chris Chapman. And again, we have that iconic Rincon Mountain. I love how every artist interprets it a little bit differently. John Iwerks painted this as a demo for one of the classes that he took out to the Salt Marsh recently. Rob Robinson painted this just this year at our last Oak Group paint out at the Carpinteria Salt Marsh. I'm so glad that we have access again. Whitney Hansen is a woodcut artist. Thomas Van Stein is well known for his nocturnes. I love this painting with a full moon in the background. And he has often taught nocturnal painting through Santa Barbara City College's adult education program. These are two more of his nocturnes, again, from that same UCSB access road. I guess the moon is pretty consistent where it rises. Bill Dewey is a photographer in the group. Love this photo. It's got to be a king tide. He's also a pilot, hence only he can take these Beautiful images. This is another Bill Dewey. I often guess what season this is. Jeremy Harper is a surfer, and you can tell, I love the fact that the water on the right is calm and tranquil and the water on the left looks absolutely surfable. Another Thomas Van Stein. Kevin Gleason. Love the light on the vegetation in the middle ground there. He's a newer Oak Group member. Chris Chapman again. I guess it's had to have been right after a rainstorm or a high tide, because the water on the left is coming up over that access road. Meredith Brooks Abbott, I believe this painting is in her current show at Sullivan Goss. Two more studies by Meredith Brooks Abbott that were painted the same day that I took that initial slide. One of my paintings still in the studio, maybe unfinished. And that yellow, I confess, is non-native mustard, but I couldn't resist. It was so beautiful. Manny Lopez painted this at our last paint out as well. And I love this painting. I love how it incorporates the water, the mud, the pickleweed, the logs that often wash up on shore. And it just seems to say everything about Carpinteria Marsh all in one. This was an invitation to a show not too long ago to benefit Trek, which is a program that takes young children out into nature. These were my kids featured on this invitation. I loved that. And on the left, you have the Evite. So we've graduated from our paper invites, but we still have mailers on the right-hand side. Such a wonderful quote. My mom, Meredith Abbott, painted this. And here they are out there on the road doing their thing. I wish I had waited a few minutes for them to actually put something on their canvases, but we often take the kids out as part of their tutorial. Multiple generations. We are at the beach outlet. My mom's favorite painting vehicle. It's a good shot of the Estero Road. You can really get a good perspective of where we are. Utilizing the UCSB picnic tables. Looking for crabs and fish. There's a lot of sharks out there right now. It's pretty fun. And this slide I just had to show because why we would be sketching a small pony, I really can't tell you, but we were. And then on the right-hand side is my daughter's painting that she did that same day. And lastly, this is a most recent painting, which will probably end up at Sullivan Goss's holiday show. A little bit more abstract, a little bit more contemporary, unfinished, but still the Carpinteria Marsh. And that leads me to my last slide, which is one of the Oak Group's favorite quotes. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has, by Margaret Mead. And I want to conclude by saying that it's been a long journey of preservation. And we as a community are so grateful for the open space that belongs to us. This is my contact information, representation, Sullivan Goss in Santa Barbara. And that concludes my little slideshow. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Whitney. That was really just a treat. I don't think I've ever really gotten such a amazing and almost personalized tour of just such beautiful pieces of the Carpinteria Salt Marsh, and it really made me feel and think differently about the marsh in a way that I haven't before right now too. So I really appreciate what you've shown us here tonight. Um, so we have some time for some Q&A from the audience. And so I'd love to just remind everybody about how that works. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a little Q&A button. And go ahead and type in your questions for either Whitney or Andy about the marsh, or about Whitney's work at the marsh as well. And while we're waiting for some of those questions to come in, I actually have a question to get us started. And maybe this question is about time or timing a little bit. It's actually a two-part question. The first one is, can you tell us what your favorite season is to paint in the marsh? But maybe that's an unfair question. And then, but kind of my bigger question is, you've been in, you've grown up in Carpinteria. You've been really painting the marsh for a long time. And can you tell us what you've noticed about the change, about the environmental change at the salt marsh over the years, either growing up or being an artist and really approaching the salt marsh from that perspective?
All right. Well, the first part of the question, my favorite season, is definitely fall. The light is so crisp. The shadows are defined. They're almost blue. You have this beautiful palette of fall colors. Some of the grass is very dark red. Some of the grass is very orange and auburn. It's a very crisp time of year, as opposed to summertime. I'm not as drawn to the blues and the greens, to be honest with you. It's still beautiful, but it doesn't resonate with the same kind of majesty that fall does. And then in terms of changes to the estero, I can honestly say that it's timeless. Driving down the UCSB access road today is exactly like it was when we first started painting, and that's really a beautiful thing. I mean, it is so preserved. I do want to say that there's maybe more biodiversity. I don't remember seeing so many creatures in the salt marsh, so many sharks that you can watch swimming around, and bird species. It's a treat, and it's a treat to bring other artists there, because you never know when you might catch a glimpse of a heron or a snowy egret.
Well, so there's a whole flurry of questions that have come through from Q&A here, so I'm going to dig in there. First is about the Oak Group, and one of our audience members asks, how are members of the Oak Group selected, recruited? How does this group get together?
That's a very good question. Well, initially the Oak Group was formed because everybody was friends and everybody had a common interest in painting the landscape. As it grew, we decided that it was important to cap our numbers at 25, but we still had so many people that we wanted to include. So we decided that if somebody left the group or if somebody passed away, then we would vote to incorporate the next member. So there is an official voting process, but it's important to find people that are willing to hang the shows and do the mailing list and do some of the grunt work, as well as love painting the landscape.
Okay, so this question is from Marilee Can-Do, and my apologies if I'm mispronouncing any names out there. And Marilee asks, do you do sketches or watercolor notes first, or do you jump right onto your canvas when you're painting plein air? This is about your process.
Oh, that's interesting. A little bit of both. I do bring a sketchbook with me, but more often than not, I will jump right in. And it's usually because whatever you are seeing is fleeting, especially when it comes to those early morning or late night studies. You want to catch that fleeting color pattern. But oftentimes those paintings will be studies for larger works. For example, that foothill study I showed you, I don't know if you remember it, but it was sort of a square study with the shadows on the foothills and the marsh in the foreground. That became a much bigger, almost, I think, 6 feet by 5 feet painting.
And so our next question here is from Susan King. And Susan asks, where can you see the art by the Oak Group?
Oh, come to our Oak Group shows. We have several every year, depending upon the beneficiary. And oftentimes we show at the Santa Barbara Faulkner Gallery. Join our mailing list.
And Susan also asks, is it possible to purchase your artwork?
Yes, for sure. Most of the paintings that I just showed you are long gone. They're like children. They're off in the world. But Sullivan Goss is the gallery that represents me locally. And then I also show with the Oak Group.
Great. And okay, so here's another question. This question I think is for Andy actually. And David Talene Lawton asks, what research is active on the marsh today?
Yeah, so quite a bit. We have researchers that are focusing on various aspects of climate change. So the impacts of sea level rise and how that's changing patterns of vegetation. Lately, I'm not exactly sure why, but the marsh has become sort of a test bed for a lot of people looking to develop new technology in remote sensing. And so this is really fancy cameras with hyperspectral sensors that you can mount onto small drones and look at reflectance patterns in vegetation to see if plants are stressed, maybe because of sea level rise or excessive nutrients, some other impact to the marsh, all the way up to folks that are working on satellite imagery and ways to get pictures of how healthy ecosystems are using satellite photos. Again, I'm not sure why the marsh has sort of become a center for these studies, but it has. And so we benefit by getting loads and loads of imagery that are sufficient. We can actually tell individual plants apart, all the way up to we can see the whole marsh in a single photo. We also have people looking at carbon sequestration, how the marsh does in collecting and storing carbon from the atmosphere. We have folks looking at the impacts of nutrients, namely nitrogen, on marsh vegetation. We have a lot of work being done on restoration of native plants within the marsh and developing ways to remove invasive plants in order to protect the natives. So much of the work being done in the reserve is done by graduate students from UC Santa Barbara, but also from UCLA, Cal State Channel Islands, UC Riverside, UC San Diego. So really university campuses throughout Southern California, as well as faculty and researchers from those institutions and even institutions from around the world. I mentioned the talk that Kevin Lafferty gave about parasites, and that work really is known globally. And so I get contacted by researchers from Australia, from Spain, from Portugal that say, I'm in Santa Barbara and I want to come see the famous Carpinteria Salt Marsh because they've read about it in all these papers about parasites. So.
That's so interesting. Yes, the marsh is we're learning tonight, I guess, that's where research and art and restoration and conservation and everything kind of comes together maybe in one way. There's a follow-up question, Andy, from Susan King, asking if does Channel Islands Restoration, and many of you probably are familiar with Channel Islands Restoration. It's a local group here in the Santa Barbara area. Do they help in the marsh?
Yeah, they do. They were involved very early on in a project we have that's ongoing to remove very invasive species of non-native sea lavender. And in many places, this plant is sort of removed by the use of herbicides. And of course, we really don't use a lot of herbicides in the salt marsh. And so we're looking for more natural ways to remove it. And Channel Islands Restoration was involved in early efforts to map the spread and the extent of the non-native sea lavender, and then also to help us begin to remove it.
And thank you, Andy. This next is more of a comment, but I'd like to just read it for everybody. And this is from Wayne Farron. And Wayne Farron is Andy's predecessor, was the longtime Carpinteria Salt Marsh Reserve Director, and also with the UCSB Natural Reserve System. So Wayne, it's great that you're out there. And Wayne just wanted to say fabulous presentation and art, Whitney. And thank you for representing the marsh in such a profound yet spiritual manner. And I want to second Wayne's comment as well. So thank you for that. And then I'm actually going to insert myself again and ask another question. And Whitney, you had one of your, you'd mentioned the Thomas fire. And so maybe this is another question about time and timing for me. But, you know, to me, the Thomas fire really changed the marsh, or I guess the subsequent debris flows in particular, but the Thomas fire as well changed the marsh in such a quick way, you know, on timescales that are different than seasons, perhaps. And what did you notice about the changes to the marsh, or did it kind of give you a different way to have a perspective on that habitat or on that environment?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you realize just how fragile these ecosystems are. You know, I remember after Carpinteria was completely covered in ash, and you can see it in more obvious places, but of course it is covering nature as well. And it takes a long time to recover from that layer. It takes many rainstorms, and you know, you can still dig down and find layers of gray if you really tried.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much again, Whitney, for your presentation tonight. I want to also say thank you to the audience for tuning in, and for all of your great questions, and also to Andy for a great presentation on the Carpinteria Salt Marsh Reserve as well. I know I'm very excited about all this. I can't wait to go to Sullivan Goss and see what's going on there soon too. I just want to take a minute also to talk about next week's presentation. So today we're at the Carpinteria Salt Marsh Reserve. Next week we're going to head over to UCSB's Sedgwick Reserve, located in the Santa Ynez Valley. Also a lot of oaks out there, and oak group members too. And we're going to hear from Dr. Dana Chadwick of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory at NASA, who will be talking about tracking ecosystem phenology with airborne measurements. So we're going to hop above in the clouds and see what's going on from Sedgwick from that perspective. So once again, my many thanks to our speakers and to our audience out there. And we hope to see you again next week at this time, same place. So have a great rest of your evening, everyone, and see you next time. Thanks. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Whitney.